Welcome back to the Injury Prone Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Edwin Porras, physical therapy, medical analyst, fantasypoints.com. I've been really bad at this whole promotion thing. So before we get to the guest, I need to say you have three options, listeners. Option number one, you can go to Underdog, use promo code Injury Prone. You're going to get up to $1,000 matched over at Underdog. Those best ball streets are closing very soon, so make sure you get over there. That's option number one. Option number two, you can go to my Twitter, my X, whatever you want to call it, at FB Injury Doc, tap on the pin tweet, buy that Injury Prone draft guide. And lastly, we're still looking for participants for the Injury Prone League, Superflex League. So email me, injurypronepod@gmail.com if you want in on that league. It's a Superflex League. Probably make it a free league just for fun because we're degenerates, or throw a couple dollars down. We'll decide once it's filled. Lastly, but most importantly, we have Triple D, Dalton, Don here. He is, of course, with Yahoo Sports, my arch nemesis, one of my arch nemesis in our Superflex draft at the Injury Prone Invitational, going on the fourth year now, I believe. He is, hold on, I lost your Twitter, Dalton. He is, just Dalton Del Don. Perfect. I'm sure that was available when you looked at it. Dalton Del Don on Twitter. Dalton, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing well, Edwin. Thanks for having me. Also, thanks for running this league. I enjoy it with all the industry folks. It's been a fun draft. I'm in a home league that's the same exact setup with the Superflex. It's with some high school buddies, whatever. It's been too many years, 25 years now and counting. And it's the same exact setup, and it's a slow draft, and we're like in the same round. So you'll forgive me if I get confused who I'm drafting here, because it's literally almost.
That's okay. I have it pulled up here.
All right, let's talk this. It's a fun draft.
Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Good times. I was just gonna say that I have implemented different strategies. I went Breece Hall early there, and I went Richardson quarterback in ours. I know we're going to talk about that, but man, trying to come up with a strategy in Superflex is super interesting, and it's so dependent on your league mates, like knowing when they're going to draft quarterbacks and whatnot. But that's exciting to talk strategy about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. The strategy is tough. So really, when it comes to, I talked with Rich Rebar about this earlier this week too. Just looking back at the draft from last year, it's so funny to see how we drafted, what it looked like, and how it ended. Right. For example, my first three picks were, two of my first three I know were Garrett Wilson and Tony Pollard. So obviously that did not work out very well for me at all. That was the worst season I've had. Right. But of course, things always work themselves out. There's always waiver wire darlings. Superflex, like you said, keeps it interesting. Last season, we had the most quarterbacks go down for longer than 6 games since I started, tracking this stuff. So the Superflex aspect really makes it interesting. Now, you drafted in our league, and we'll jump right into it, out of the 3 spot. And you said, you said you took right off the bat Anthony Richardson. I really like that. We're going to get to the flaming hot takes, but I want to talk sort of big picture strategy for Superflex because, man, I've been doing this for 4 years now with you guys, and it's just a murderous row. It's you, it's Matt Harmon, it's Graham Barfield, it's Rich Rebar, it's JJ Zachariason. I mean, there's no value to be had in these drafts. At times when something feels like a reach to me, I'm just doing it because I know that I need to either gain some advantage, gain some ground, gain some leverage, and classify it as a reach, whatever the case may be. And I still don't. I never walk away from these drafts looking at my team and being totally in love with it. And it's just because these drafters are just so sharp. So out of the 3 slot, you went Anthony Richardson. What was your goal or your intention going into this draft?
So on one hand, in a Superflex, I want to come away with one of the top 5 or 6 running backs who run. Obviously, Richardson. I love Murray more than most this year. But on the other hand, it's so deep. You definitely can wait this year. Quarterback has never, ever been deeper. I mean, Geno Smith is 1 year removed from leading the NFC in passing touchdowns. And Lord Reeves got him in round 8 and then followed him up with Bryce Young in round 9. I think that's the way to go, is get Lamar Jackson running quarterback. And then if you can wait 8 and 9 and get even a third one like that. In my home league, Geno went in round 6. It's like I said, very different because you just have to know when your other league mates are going to draft. Those guys like to be assholes and draft 3 and 4 quarterbacks and, just hoard them. So I love Richardson. We'll talk about that. I could have easily gone Breece Hall there in third overall. I love him. But I think the mistake I made here is then coming back with Purdy in round 3. I love Purdy, but with no Trent Williams and Brandon Ayuk, I'm already regretting that pick. I think the drop off with real upside QBs, the tier, is your guy, Caleb Williams. I like getting Josh Allen and Caleb. And then after Caleb on the board, after I took Purdy, shortly thereafter, Tua went, Lawrence and Cousins. I don't see a big difference between Geno Smith, Aaron Rodgers 5 rounds later. So I think those are the guys that really came away from our draft looking like the winners. The guys that got the running quarterback early and then just waited and then got another guy who to me is the same, like Geno Smith's the same tier as Kirk Cousins for me.
Yeah, and those guys, that's pretty flat, right? And like the other thing is, when do you start, shifting away from those wide receivers? Because it is a 3 wide receiver league, right? So you went Marvin Harrison Jr. here, and then you got lucky enough to where I should have done this, right? So again, this is me basically. This whole podcast just me allowing me to vent about this draft here, Dalton. So I went Devontae Smith. I don't hate it, but then 2 picks later, you went Rashee Rice, right? He's your second wide receiver here. I really like that for you. Were you expecting him to be there at that point?
I'm super thin at wide receiver, admittedly, but you're going to be weak somewhere in a super flex. But full PPR, I don't love it. But I do love getting Rice where I did. I bumped him up to my wide receiver 20. Sorry, I moved him up to my wide receiver 18 right now. It just looks like he's not going to be suspended. He was so good over the second half last year. Hollywood's already injured. Kelsey's starring in TV shows and his age. I do like Worthy. I would grab him as well. But yeah, Rice there really helped me for someone who waited on receiver because it's thin. And I didn't get these running backs kept falling. I look like a boomer in this draft compared to the other guys. But I just love the price of Henry and Kenneth Walker and James Cook. But old man Hopkins, we'll talk about. Can he stay healthy? I mean, I think he can out-target Ridley this year. So I thought in PPR, he was a boring, safer pick later. And I definitely considered who you got right after Watson and Reed. They went immediately after. So definitely that was a debate for me. Usually I'm after the younger guys with upside. But in this case, I kind of wanted safety, although it's weird to say the guy Hopkins' age. But in PPR, I think the targets will be there.
Yeah, you're not known to be the safety guy, man. What's going on here? You're known to be the shoot for the, swing for the fences upside guy, and here you are drafting, guys like Derrick Henry, drafting guys like you mentioned, obviously DeAndre Hopkins. So I think the Hopkins thing in particular, I think he's going to be fine. I don't know what we're going to what we're going to get at a 32-year-old wide receiver with Will Levis under center. I think there is a little bit of potential there, especially where you're getting him in drafts. And he does tend to have this reputation of just not wanting to practice to be 100%. There's a little bit of that. I can't prove it. I'm not reporting, but it just seems like this is one of those situations where, it was an injury, but who knows how severe it actually was and how long a 32-year-old dude wanted to be in camp, which I don't necessarily blame him. So I think that Hopkins could be fine. Now you waited, for a while to get David Njoku, and you actually I think you got a pretty good, decent deal on him in the 8th round. Has this been, do you count David Njoku as one of your top tier guys? Like, are you looking at these tight ends in general as a top 6 tier, a top 8 tier? How are you separating and delineating?
Yeah, okay, we'll talk tight ends. I have Trey McBride as my tight end 1, so I've been ending up with a lot of him because obviously Laporta and Kelsey go ahead of him in most drafts. George Kittle has been a big target of mine. Even in full PPR leagues, Kincaid goes like multiple rounds ahead of Kittle, and I get the upside, but man, especially with increasingly likely chance of maybe no Ayuk, love Kittle. And then Njoku is my next target. I think there's about 10, 11, if you want to count Bowers, and then maybe 12 Goddard, but there's a gigantic drop off there, just massive. Taysom Hill's my tight end 3, but obviously you can wait there. Colby Parkinson's my ugly guy, like late, giving him away here, but you can get him at the end of drafts, and he's just the starting tight end on the Rams. And I mean, Higbee put up numbers there, and Parkinson actually okay in Seattle, and they paid him. He's going to be the starter there. But Njoku's actually been my main target in most of my leagues. Don't love the fact in ours that Ferguson went multiple rounds later. Same with Bowers. But you look at the numbers he put up last year. Even it wasn't just Flacco. I know there's splits with Watson, and Watson's the guy there. But man, this is a really good pedigree, top talent, and just really impressed if you look at the tape. And he put up big numbers with PJ Walker and DTR throwing to him. So I think he can still, I'm kind of disregarding those splits with Watson. And even if Watson goes down, then DTR, whatever, feeds him on those underneath routes. He'll suffer far less than Amari Cooper will if and when Watson, misses more games this year. So love Njoku. He's actually my number 1 target at the tight end position this year. I have him ahead of Ingram, and no one would think that, and no one will treat him that way after watching this last preseason game when Ingram caught the touchdowns. Well, guess what? Ingram had massive. Want to talk splits? Look at Ingram splits with Christian Kirk on and off the field last year, and Kirk didn't play in that preseason game. So I like Njoku's upside actually more than Ingram.
That's interesting, right? Like, I mean, obviously David Njoku, hyper athletic, still super young. I'm pretty sure he's still what, 25, 24, something like that. He's a younger guy, right? He came into the league when he was super, super young. I remember him being, shoot, dude, he was in the league 2019 or something like that. And so those late, career, I guess mid-career breakouts by tight ends are definitely something that you can look, especially if you're looking to punt. I'm a coward, Dalton. I just went Dalton Kincaid. And I just stacked him with Josh Allen. So I kind of
that makes
regretted the
sense.
pick
So no, that
immediately
makes
after. I mean, it was okay, right? Like I'm okay. I just tight end is still never fun for me. So what are you doing in terms of tight end strategy? Are you still targeting David Njoku in non-super flex leagues?
Yes, that has absolutely been my guy. And if you're in even if I'm in the front, and he goes say mid ninth in a lot of NFFC leagues, I'll jump him early eighth because there's a huge drop off if you miss out on the Bowers top 11 ish, and it's tricky. You come away weak, but you want to build your wide receivers early. Want one of these athletic quarterbacks. You want one of these top tier tight ends. I mean, it is tricky, but that's what I've been settling. I've been kind of passing on going with the running quarterback over McBride and going after Njoku in round 8 and 9. And sometimes some leagues he's falling further. I mean, he didn't light it up in the preseason, and it doesn't feel like he's a guy most fantasy managers are after.
Right. I just think that yeah. I know we say this every year, but it seems like tight end is a little deeper this year. Maybe it's just a little top heavier than usual.
Right.
But I definitely wanted to get your thoughts on super flex strategy, tight end strategy. So I'm glad we got stuck a little bit of that. But now this is what everybody wants you for, Dalton. This is what you're known for your slugging percentage. What do you want to call it? Right. You're known for hitting these picks out of the park. And I really am, you and Scott Barrett give same ethos of like, we want power law players. We don't want these average ADP beaters. So you have been on board with some pretty heavy hitters this year, again, as expected, league winners. And, one of the things that I think about when I'm drafting, right, is like, is this guy going to bury me if I don't take some of him? If I don't draft some Nico Collins, right? If I don't draft some Breece Hall, if I don't draft some of those guys that are those power law players, like, am I just going to be buried? So to me, I think that definition is variable amongst a lot of different people, but you're one of the best at actually choosing those guys, committing to it and ranking them that way, going for it. And obviously you went Anthony Richardson here in the Superflex draft, at the third overall pick, which I have no problem doing. I thought I toyed with the idea. But again, I am a coward. I toyed with the idea of taking him 1 overall just to shake the league up, but didn't do it. I let him fall to you. So who are let's go, we can do 3 or 4 or 5, however many guys that you think that if fantasy drafters, if listeners don't take at least some of these guys in some of their drafts, they will probably not win their league. Who are these guys?
All right, I've strongly considered Breece Hall there, even in a super flex. I've taken him number 1 overall in some high stakes leagues, non-super flex, but he's the number 1 player on my board entering the year. CD Lamb now is pretty close in PPR, but I moved him ahead of my guy CMC. Anthony Richardson. So the first 3 guys I'm going to talk about with you, Edwin, are injury prone guys. So it's feel fittingly. I'm in on these guys that are definitely enter with heightened risk. Although it's got to be noted, should be noted that every player in the NFL enters with significant injury risk. What is the every running backs, what is the average amount of games played? Like 13.6 or something like that. So yep. I do want people to kind of realize that when addressing this. Anthony Richardson, yeah, he was, I'm happy to take him number 3 overall here. Would have considered him number 1 overall. Ironically, in Superflex, he's loses a little value in the sense that there's less replacement value. So if he goes down, I'm not gonna be able to replace him with a quarterback on the wire, where I am easily in any other 1 quarterback league. That's why I'm like, go draft him in the 6th round for sure, because his fantasy upside is equivalent, if not higher, than Josh Allen, losing Diggs, and Hurts with all kinds of question marks there too. And I think it's a bit of a paradox with Anthony Richardson will be a better passer in the future, 2 to 3 years from now, but he will not run like he will this year. So we're just getting the fantasy apex this year behind a top 5 offensive line, a top 3 play caller. What if AD Mitchell's really good too, to go along with Pittman and Josh Downs? I mean, Harmon loves Downs. I mean, these could be 3 legit wide receivers. I mean, Jonathan Taylor, maybe he takes some touchdowns, but it's good that he's really good. I think the offense is going to be good. They were top 5 in plays per game last year with Richardson under center, the most fantasy points per dropback since Lamar Jackson's historic season. So I'm all in on Richardson. I get it. He's super raw. You can't extrapolate the small sample last year and the injuries. What can I say? I mean, it was concussion and the shoulder, and he needs to protect himself better, but I love the fact he's not going to change his playing style. He was on pace for 26 rushing touchdowns last year. He matched CJ Stroud's top 5 weekly fantasy finishes last year, and he played 11 quarters.
Yeah, I mean, the dude is going to run the ball. I mean, they're going to give him the ball. The RPO, obviously, they're going to spam the RPOs, which is going to expand running lanes for Jonathan Taylor, which will then obviously reciprocate back to Anthony Richardson. I think that offense is going to be fantasy friendly. You mentioned at the top, right, the difference between or I guess how every position or every player comes into the NFL, right? They're all at risk to some degree. And this is actually in the injury prone draft guide. This is since 2013, and this is by ADP, right? So this is by ADP since 2013, top 12 running backs versus top 12 wide receivers by ADP. Running backs on average, they miss 3 games per season. Wide receivers on average, they miss 2.2 games per season, right? The median for both running backs and wide receivers of missed games is 1. The only difference, or the biggest difference, would be running backs tend to miss 7+ games more often than wide receivers, but the margins are so thin. And I remember last year, this was really accentuated. And every player, not just running backs, are at risk for injury. Wide receivers miss time almost just as often as running backs do, right? Justin Jefferson, we saw that last year. Jamar Chase was banged up. Deebo Samuel's banged up, right? These wide receivers miss time too. So you're not necessarily any safer going the wide receiver route than you are going the running back route. And in terms of Anthony Richardson specifically, yes, the data shows there's no real correlation between running quarterbacks and injuries, but there actually tends to be a bit of a negative correlation, which makes sense, right? Because you are you're able to evade pressure, able to evade contact. But that's the big thing, right? Lamar Jackson's a master of getting down, right? Lamar Jackson's a master of sliding before somebody gets to him. And Anthony Richardson does need a little bit of that in his game, I think, for me to feel better about it. But in terms of him avoiding big hits, I think that he's going to be able to do that. And I'm not necessarily more concerned from an injury perspective for him this season. Who's your next guy here, Dalton?
Love to hear that about Richardson. He's really good at avoiding sacks, pressure to sack ratio too. So hopefully that helps as well. Okay, we'll go running back injury prone guy. De'Von Achane, just pushing the chips all in here. Averaged the 4th most fantasy points last season, despite playing 5 snaps or fewer in 2 games. He never eclipsed 18 carries or 38 snaps. Healthy full season pace of 1,500 yards and 17 touchdowns, despite sharing the backfield with the running back who led the NFL in touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs averaged 1.1 fewer opportunities with David Montgomery on the field. So I just feel like we're getting Gibbs a round and a half later. I'll draft Achane in the middle of round 2 in full PPR leagues because I like him more than Barkley and Kyren Williams. So if my build's a wide receiver first and I want one of these 5 or 6 running backs, that I trust, I'll take Achane as early as round 2. I get it. He's small, and maybe it's wish casting for 250 touches even. But man, this backfield in Miami scored 50 plus more fantasy points than any backfield had in years last year. It's McDaniel. I mean, it's such a good system, such a good player. Give me all the Achane.
I actually think this is a good conversation. I'd be curious to get your thoughts. You mentioned Achane, right? And obviously Mostert got all the touchdowns last year. So in terms of, and Rich Rebar is actually who brought this up, in terms of rushing touchdowns over expected, Miami was up there like by a large margin. And on one hand, you can argue, well, of course, they're going to regress in the rushing touchdown department overall, which would, of course, lower the ceiling of everybody in that backfield. On the other hand, when you have Kyle Shanahan's run game coordinator as the head coach of a football team, how much more regression are you really worried about in the rushing touchdown department?
Yeah, and I wanted to give two. I mean, maybe Tua should have thrown 3 or 4 more. I mean, definitely was a little unlucky in touchdowns, but he still had like 29 TD passes. And what if Hill or Waddle get injured, or what if Mostert gets injured? I mean, there's contingency upside here, and I love that Jalen Wright's emerged. If you draft Achane, just jump right in the round 10, back him up there for insurance, and even Mostert falls because people don't want so boring and so old and so not boring, but so worrisome, at his age. But all these backfields just a gold mine. And as you said, McDaniel, I mean, he was the Niners run game coordinator. I mean, this is the real stuff. I mean, all that motion. Yes, they'll regress some next year, and Achane won't have the highest yards per carry in NFL history again. But man, he's going to remain efficient. And I love his upside as a receiver. I believe he had the same number of first read targets as Rachaad White last year. And this is as a rookie and missing a bunch of snaps. First 3 targets, and they've been lining him up out wide in preseason. So a ton of upside through the air here through Achane. He could be the number 1 fantasy back or number 2 or 3 in only 248 touches. Like, he really has that range of outcomes.
Yeah, I agree with you there. His range of outcomes is absolutely out of this world. And the one thing I did want to mention about him, because I know there's a little bit of injury concern with him in particular.
Well,
The
more
thing
than a little,
about
maybe. You
H
tell me.
more
Yeah, you tell
than
me. Yeah. Is he
well,
too small? He bulked
the
up.
thing
Do you like? Sorry to interrupt, but do you like hearing the bulking up of that stuff? Okay, now I'll leave the floor to you. Throw some cold water on it if I'm off. I mean, I get it. I'm more worried about him than I would say Richardson. I mean, how they're built.
No, I don't think that it's necessarily something. I think it's a good discussion. I don't necessarily think that it's predictive of injury, right? So if you look at the study where there's basically the study they did over 10 years, a 10-year period, and what they saw was that there was essentially no difference in injury rates based on BMI between running backs who saw 150 carries or running backs who saw 300 plus carries. And I'm not an injury alarmist, right? But I tweeted this in July. We can't predict injury, but when we look at De'Von Achane, before he bulked up, his BMI was 27.8. I mean, he's ever so slightly outside of that quote unquote safe zone where there's no difference in running back injury, where, but barely, right? We're talking like 28, 29, he's just outside of that, what we would consider safe zone of a BMI. His BMI is around 28. But again, he bulked up. That could help. We can't necessarily say that he missed time last year because he was small, right? Because we've seen this injury. I mean, Nick Chubb, a massive human, a strong human, squatting 500 pounds, 8 months post-op from an ACL. He has had MCL issues prior to this major injury that he had in 2023. Big, strong running backs get injured just as often as the smaller ones. So I think it's, what I'm trying to say is I think it's a little overblown. We do like to hear that he bulked up. We do like to hear that they're implementing, a strength program for him. That's not a bad thing. So, I think as we move forward, it's tough to project things that we've never seen before. But, we didn't think Devontae Smith, well, not we, but some people, the collective, we generally thought, oh, no way Devontae Smith can be successful, right? The same thing happened with Tank Dell. No way Tank Dell can be successful. I think we're just starting to see that positionless football really start to take over. And if, they do limit his touches, they do limit some of his between the tackles carries when talking about De'Von Achane, then I don't see a reason why he can't be successful and play, the average 13, 14 games. So no, I don't necessarily have cold water pour on you necessarily. I think that it's something that you look at cautiously, but it's not a reason to fade a guy with the upside that he has.
And the way I look at it, even if he misses 3 or 4 games, no player in the league is more likely to help win your week. Those, other 12 or so, he's active. So I think the upside is worth it, but definitely a risk. And my next guy, not quite a young guy, but another injury prone, absolutely injury risk is Cooper Kupp. Man, I was in on him throughout summer. His ADP has definitely climbed, but I love the positive reports. But we have many things to go over here. First of all, just the best setup in with the Rams. I mean, their wide receivers, it's condensed. They're routinely top 3 fantasy production every year. Puka Nacua ran more routes last year than he did all his college career, and he enters the season with an injury. I know this bursa sack is not supposed to be serious. I'd love to hear your opinion. And he's practicing fully now. Greg Rosenthal from NFL.com was on Establish the Run pod and basically said, like, I won't speak anymore, but I would avoid Nacua. I don't know. He seems to know things. So I hope Nacua stays healthy and everything's fine with him. But Kupp matched him in targets last year playing on one leg. Do not look at his efficiency. Yes, of course he was bad last year. He was completely compromised. Normally, I'm not after 31-year-old wide receivers, but historically, entering their 8th year in the league has not seen their baseline production drop. He's supposedly healthy, the centerpiece of this offense. We do need Matthew Stafford to stay healthy as well. But talk to me about Kupp, because I've been willing to draft him early 2nd round, and I actually have him ranked ahead of Nacua. So I'm never going to end up in Nacua on any teams.
No, I mean, I think, okay, so you hit on a couple different things there. Number one, Puka Nacua returned to practice on Monday with doing individual drills. He's going to have plenty of time to get back by week 1. I'm not going to deny that, these reporters, Rosenthal in particular, probably has, information we're not privy to. I get that.
Maybe nothing.
At the same time, no disrespect. Non-medical personnel, non-medical reporters, they mess things up and misinterpret all the time, which is understandable. They're not trained in medicine. They're not trained in sports medicine. That happens, right? An example that I just gave on Twitter. Last year, Adam Schefter came on his own podcast and declared that Jerry Jeudy was going to be out 6 or 7 weeks with his hamstring strain because he thought it was severe. Well, Jerry Jeudy was out like 2 or 3 weeks and he was back out on the field. And I said at the time, hey, listen, let's not get over our skis here. If we look at the data, that's not necessarily the most likely outcome. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. And Schefter, a reliable guy with reliable sources, right? Not to say that Rosenthal isn't, but again, he did say at the end Rosenthal said something along the lines of like vibes, right? Bad vibes. So who knows what he knows? But again, This Puka Nacua situation, I think, is being a little overblown. The thing about those injuries is that they are extremely painful. You don't want to rupture. You don't want to rupture any sacks, but if you're if you're going to rupture a sack, bursa sack is probably the number 2 I don't want to rupture. So that's a painful thing. It just takes a little bit of time to get back, but it's not going to be something that lingers. If you were going to be concerned about Puka Nacua and his knee prior to this, then that's a different situation, a different story. He did kind of struggle with his knee through college, so that's something that we're going to have to monitor, sort of like AJ Brown in the early parts of AJ Brown's career. But I'm not super concerned with Puka Nacua, and I'm not super concerned with Cooper Kupp. You mentioned his history, right? And I think painting the context is super important. Last year, he was out for weeks 1 through 4, obviously, right? He was on his deathbed. He was, going to go on his retirement tour. And, it was the end of the world for Cooper Kupp. And I said at the time, probably not likely. Comes back in week 5 and week 5 and 6, he averages 20 points. Week 7, obviously, we see Cooper up for 154. Kupp didn't look so hot. Stafford gets injured in week 8. Stafford also misses week 9. Both of those games, Puka and Kupp, they both scored fewer than 6 PPR points, right? So then they have their bye week in week 10. Week 11, Stafford's back. Cooper Kupp rolls his ankle, scores 1.3 points, right? Then in week 12, Puka and Kupp again, they both combined to score less than 6 PPR points. What you finally saw in week 13 to 17, after he was, he battled the hamstring, he battled the ankle, Kupp averaged 14.8 points per game, good for wide receiver 11. Puka Nacua finished wide receiver 3. The thing about the risk with Cooper Kupp isn't that he has necessarily fallen off, in my opinion. The risk with Cooper Kupp is that there's a 34% risk of re-injuring your hamstring. But we said the exact same thing about Keenan Allen last year. Keenan Allen shoved it down my throat. And from a fantasy perspective, you can say what you want about him as a receiver. I know Harmon's not necessarily high on him at this point in his career, but Cooper Kupp is, and this stuff does matter. It's not just conjecture, right? Like, he is one of the hardest workers by all accounts, by most reporters. Different sources will tell you he is a nut job. There's a story about Puka Nacua working out with Cooper Kupp and every morning, in the offseason. And for the first week, Puka Nacua was like throwing up in the bushes because he couldn't keep up with Cooper Kupp, right? Almost, 7-8 years older than Puka Nacua. So all those things matter. And the reason I say that is because those recurrence rates that I give, I like to remind people they're not static. It's going to be individual. You have to zoom in and look at the situation at hand. And the situation at hand is that we have the last Triple Crown winner, who's 31 years old, is better than Keenan Allen was at that point last year, is in a better offense with a better play caller in a better situation at this point in their careers with a better pedigree and a body of work. I don't see the point of fading Cooper Kupp because last year went poorly. If you want to fade Cooper Kupp because you think that his role will change dramatically, okay, I guess we can have a conversation. But people are just scared off because of his age and the injury history. And I didn't mean to take over the podcast here, Dalton, but I'm not, again, going to pour water on this pick. I mean, in the other Superflex draft, this is basically a mirror image. The other draft that I'm in with other analysts, I was at the 12 slot, and I took Cooper Kupp in the 3rd round, right? So I'm not afraid to shoot for the stars with Cooper Kupp. So I'm all in there too.
Okay, good to hear. I know the hamstring is obviously the main concern because that was, just kind of a unique one too, and you don't have all the information, but good to hear that you're not overly concerned other than just in general. The recurrence rate's pretty high for hamstring, it sounds like. That's more so than the
generally speaking, yes. Yeah, okay. High ankle sprain actually they don't recur as often as the narratives will tell you. Soft tissue injuries, hamstrings in particular, can get bad. But I mean, another guy who almost tore his hamstring off the bone was Mike Evans, and he hasn't had any issues since 2019 with it. So again, the recurrence rates, they happen. But if we were going to see a recurrence for Cooper Kupp, we probably would have seen it at some point last year. Not to say that it can't happen, but it's, again, those numbers aren't static. And if a dude works hard with their medical staff and their medical staff is sharp, which the Rams medical staff is sharp, you definitely can mitigate that risk. And yeah, so that's where I stand on Kupp. So I'm glad that we agree there. Who's your next guy here?
Before we go, my next guy, last guy, I want to ask you real quick. Do you have a heightened concern of Chase and Ayuk and Lamb? I know Lamb just signed, but do you have a heightened injury risk, the guys that are holding out or holding in?
That's actually a good question. I talked to Matthew Betts, another physical therapist in the space, and he actually looked at this, and there didn't seem to be much of an increase in risk at all. I think off the top of my head, Lamb has been on the injury report with like a groin issue and a calf issue. So if any of those guys, if I was semi-concerned about any of those guys, it would probably be him. And Ayuk also has a history of hamstring strains. So if they try to ramp up too quickly, too soon, then, I think that there is an increased risk. But I mean, we're talking, if you're facing, staring down the barrel of CeeDee Lamb versus Christian McCaffrey, coin flip it. I still don't care. I don't think the risk is apparent enough. I don't think that it's substantive enough to really make a difference there. Same thing with Ja'Marr Chase. I guess you have better options with, Ja'Marr Chase. That situation is getting weirder by the day. Not sure what's going on. Maybe they're in a group chat, Ja'Marr Chase and Brandon Ayuk, to play chicken and see who's going to report first or get their deal done first. But no, I'm not. Long story short, I'm not extremely concerned with either of those guys. I do think that there's a little bit of a risk, but overall, like, those guys are both kind of monsters in their own right. So I think given their ADP, I'm not going to make it, use it as a tiebreaker.
Okay, that's fair. All right, before we get to my final guy, I'll give you one more hot take. I moved Kenneth Walker as my RB10 ahead of ETN, ahead of Pacheco after they just signed P. Ryan. I think he's going to be a monster in Seattle, and I just love I think the situation is going to be so much better there in Seattle. But my final guy is James Conner, another injury guy I just like talk to you about. I just have been targeting all Arizona guys. I think their offense is going to be good, much better this year. It was top 10 last year in the second half before adding Marvin Harrison, and now Murray will be a second year removed from his knee surgery. Ian Harditz tweeted this: games missed over the last 3 seasons. Jonathan Taylor 13, Kyron Williams 12, McCaffrey 11, Breece Hall 10, Derrick Henry 10, James Conner 10. So yes, he's likely at this stage of his career to miss another 3 or 4 games, but I think he can be a top 5 fantasy back when he's on the field. I mean, last year he was awesome. There's no guarantee he'll be, top 3 in rush yards of expectation again, but this is a good player in a much improved situation. I see a lot of shootouts in the NFC West. So tell me I'm not being too overly injury optimistic with a guy like Conner, an aging back who obviously misses 2 to 4 games every year.
That's really that's an interesting one, right? So obviously my whole ethos is like injury prone is alive, right? And to a certain degree, I still believe that. There's a nuance and some conversation to be had, but I'm telling you, I don't know. I thought James Conner was going to be out of the league and injured 3 years ago. I tweeted, I remember, about his connective tissue injury. He even got in like an ATV accident or something, and he broke his collarbone or something crazy. And I was like, dude, this guy can't even stay healthy when he's not playing football. So I thought that some connective tissue dysfunctional thing was happening with him. Not the case. He's still chugging along. I think that as he gets older, then, recovering and bouncing back does get a little tougher. So, he's shoved it down my throat the last 3-4 seasons in a very similar way that Derrick Henry has. And, ultimately what we have is James Conner, a guy who, like you said, like his numbers are it's almost like he's aging in reverse. So it's very strange to see and observe. I'm still taking some Trey Benson when I can get him. Yeah. I still think that you're still living with that risk of not just necessarily him getting injured, but as backs get older, there's a reason that their production falls off as their contract years go on, as their age go on, because these guys, I think it just goes under discussed how much split seconds matter. And when you get into that 28, 29, 30-year-old type of back, then that split second that they may have in their processing time, just they can't quite make that cut anymore. They can't quite get that step on the competition. Like, that stuff matters, and that split second results in just like dramatic fall offs. So that's still a risk with James Conner, right? That's the risk that I view more so, I guess on top of the injury risk, because it's always something random with him. So I do think that of all the guys you've listed, it's funny because he's the guy that's proved me wrong so often, but he's also the guy that, has me clutching my pearls a little bit. So that's sort of where I stand on James Conner, but I also understand the upside case that you're making for him.
I seem to be on him the wrong year every time. The year he gets injured so it'll probably happen this one. And he's not super high in drafts, but yeah, you absolutely could be right as far as aging, and he absolutely could decline quickly at that stage of his career. But how I'm kind of treating it is that Benson's more of an insurance policy and not really. The more you look into his college career, I don't think he's a threat to, certainly not a threat to Conner if he plays like he did last year. And again, he'll probably miss a couple games, but I think there's upside that he's like a really legit top 5 fantasy back win on the field per game this year.
No, absolutely. Anybody else, Dalton? Who else do these drafters need to get? These listeners need to get on their teams?
Again, Kenneth Walker is the guy moving up my board. Malik Neighbors, I was in on him before the camp highlights. I get that Daniel Jones is a problem, and that pick 6 has hopefully helped his ADP. But Daniel Jones was a league average success rate with Dable last year, small sample. But I think Neighbors is going to get 160 plus targets, if not 180, if he can stay healthy, and he's just going to be approach Marvin Harrison's season only a couple rounds later.
All right, there you have it. everybody that you need to draft: Anthony Richardson. Tell me if I missed somebody. Anthony Richardson, De'Von Achane, James Conner, Kenneth Walker, Malik Neighbors. Who was the other one that I'm missing here that we talked about?
Cooper Kupp, old man Kupp.
Cooper Kupp. Oh, of course. How could I forget about old man Kupp? Those are the guys Dalton Don's getting on a squad. Those are the guys that you should be getting on a squad. Dalton, before we get out of here, where do you want to direct the people?
Follow me on Twitter at X at Dalton Don. And yeah, I'm usually pretty good at getting back at lineup questions and whatnot. Do the best I can. Thanks for having me on, man. Good times talking injuries, because I wanted to highlight those guys, but those I didn't even have to make a stretch. Those really are the guys I'm targeting the most. So hopefully it doesn't end in heartache, because what could go wrong? Relying on Richardson and Achane and Kupp. I mean, what could go wrong with that?
Yeah. Big swings. We got to take big swings around here. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Dalton Don. We will catch you on the flip side.